The pound-for-pound rankings, like the ordinary divisional rankings, are voted on by a set of media members that each brings their own perspective, and sometimes very clear bias, to the table. So for today's video, I'm going to try and put my own opinion out there. It'll be a ranking based on recent form, wins and losses, overall ability shown, overall success, relative to the strength of the division pound for pound, while also putting a fair but not overly heavy emphasis on your standing within the sport historically, but again not too heavily and not too far back in time. Head-to-head records can also be a factor, but it won't always be as straightforward as Fighter X beat Fighter Y, so he goes ahead of him. Anyway, I'll be doing it as a top 20 as well, just to bring a few more title contenders into the mix. So without further ado, I give you my alternate pound-for-pound rankings. Number 20, Jamal Hill. In the 20th position is the former 205-pound champion who never actually lost his belt, Jamal Hill. Now of course, beating an aging, soon-to-be retired Glover Teixeira, fresh off of that war with Yuri Prochazka, is not quite the type of title-winning competition that some of these other fighters can boast, even in non-title fights. But I think that Hill, despite the lack of depth at 205 pounds, deserves his spot as a legitimate champion and a very good fighter. I'm quite interested to see more for him, and I guess I'll leave it at that. Number 19, Merab Dvalishvili. Fighters like Merab Dvalishvili are what made me decide to make this a top 20. His wins over elite bantamweights like Petr Yan and Jose Aldo were terrifying displays of attrition and endurance. Bantamweight, in my opinion, is the strongest division in the sport, and singling yourself out as a real title threat as Merab has does count for a lot in my book. Number 18, Yuri Prochazka. Yuri Prochazka entered the UFC with a top 10 test against Volkan Oezdemir and has been a staple of the upper tiers at 205 ever since. He beat and finished a Dominic Reyes who had just very nearly beaten John Jones, and then finished Glover Teixeira by way of submission to win the title. Sure, the defeat to Poatan definitely hurts him, but I do think that Yuri has shown us more at the highest level than someone like Jamal Hill, for example. So he comes in at number 18. Number 17, Brandon Moreno. Brandon Moreno may have lost the flyweight belt twice, but his status as an elite fixture within the division has been set in stone ever since he went through that opening bout of his quadrilogy with Davison Figueiredo. Moreno is still only 30, and while he does have miles in the tank, I would give him as good a chance as anyone of working his way into yet another title fight before the year is through. Number 16, Justin Gaethje. Justin Gaethje may be 0-2 with a pair of submission defeats in championship matchups, but he has been pretty spectacular otherwise. Beating Rafael Fiziev in the way he did, coupled with that brutal head kick finish of another two-time title challenger in Dustin Poirier, is enough to make his status on this list concrete. He just has too many elite level wins, both recently and over the last 5 years. The highlight does miss out on the top 15, but just barely. Number 15, Max Holloway. The first long-time former champion on our list is a bona fide legend of the featherweight division, and a guy who is so firmly placed at number 2 to Alexander Volkanovski that if he does decide to return to featherweight after his next fight, it might not be outlandish to suggest him as a favourite to recapture the belt if Volkanovski ever does vacate and go to 55 himself. Holloway has proven that he is still at the top of his game through his wins over several rising contenders within the 145-pound mix. Max is a uniquely talented striker who is a total joy to watch, and if he does actually prove himself to be a good fit at lightweight when UFC 300 comes around, who knows, maybe there'll be another exciting chapter ahead of him. Number 14, Kamaru Usman. Speaking of longtime former champions who might be due a more permanent step up in weight, Kamaru Usman looked surprisingly decent in his short notice middleweight clash with Khamzat Chimaev, so much so that despite his ongoing streak of 3 losses, I don't quite see him as totally spent. His title reign was longer and more recent than Max's, and though age is now definitely working against him, he's not so far removed from being pound for pound number 1 that I can put him any lower here. Number 13, Aljamain Sterling. Aljamain Sterling had a truly bizarre title reign, but that doesn't get in the way of the fact that his 9-fight win streak in the sport's strongest division was excellent for the most part. He beat some very credible names on his way to the belt, and despite getting the title by disqualification, he improved and turned in a much better performance to edge out Petr Yan in the rematch, a fight that I did score for him. The TJ fight was weird of course, but that was TJ's fault, and sure, losing to Sean O'Malley showcased some issues with his technical striking skills, but I for one think that Sterling is a pretty underrated talent, and I look forward to seeing him at featherweight. Number 12, Israel Adesanya. Israel Adesanya is 4-3 in his last 7 fights, and despite the fact that he has beaten some tremendous guys in that span of time and before, all while remaining probably the most active champion in the game, I can't put him in the top 10. Now, a win for Izzy next time around would do a lot as far as restoring faith is concerned, but the cracks have certainly been showing, and to lose your belt and get dominated by someone like Sean Strickland is not getting you any higher than this. Number 11. Sean Strickland. Strickland may have just lost his belt in a razor-thin fight with Dricus du Plessis, but with that victory over Israel Adesanya, he probably holds the best win any fighter I've listed so far has on their resume. And when you consider how, based on how tight that fight with DDP was, you could easily make an argument that he should still be champion. Although it wasn't a robbery, I've absolutely no problems keeping Strickland reasonably high on this list. On a quick side note, if you're enjoying this content, be sure to let us know in the comment section below, subscribe if you haven't already, and hit the like button if the mood strikes. Anyway, back to the video. Number 10. Dricus du Plessis. I was always going to put Strickland and Dricus back to back here. Each of them holds a win over a true great of the division, and DDP's victory over Robert Whittaker is as good a win as you can really get in this sport outside of the title. So yeah, I did score the fight for Strickland, but by such a minimal margin that I'm very willing to accept DDP as the champion. Number 9. Tom Aspinall. The heavyweight division is in the middle of a bit of a logjam, but for all intents and purposes, Tom Aspinall seems to be the most likely fighter to end 2024 as the champion. And considering the weird matchup between Jon Jones and Stipe Miocic that the UFC are waiting for, I've no issues putting Tom Aspinall very safely in the top 10, based on how impressive he has looked in the UFC so far and his pseudo-champion status right now. Number 8. Charles Oliveira. Charles Oliveira went on a wild win streak and finished some of the most iconic names of his era before finding himself opposite Islam Makhachev. And though he faltered there, the rebound win over Beneil Dariush is enough to keep do Bronx right in this top 10. His ability, his overall form over the last 5 years, that resume, it all certainly factors in. Number 7. Alexandre Pantoja. Okay, so we have nothing but reigning champions from here onwards. And to be honest, I think Alexandre Pantoja is a very solid champion of flyweight. One that I would not be surprised to see still in possession of the belt by the time 2025 rolls around. Beating Moreno in a war like that and then getting a defense against Brandon Royval is a hell of a back-to-back, and a great way to announce yourself on the pound-for-pound scene. Number 6. Sean O'Malley. Sean O'Malley has a lot of work to do when it comes to convincing the fans of his greatness. But if you beat Aljamain Sterling and Petr Yan back to back, that's all the convincing I need for now. O'Malley's rise to the title picture was very, very strange and his progress was constantly stunted. But I do think a lot of fans are sleeping on how good this guy actually is. Number 5. Leon Edwards. 2 defenses into his title reign and Leon Edwards is looking comfortable. So comfortable, in fact, that he put on a very bizarre performance with Colby Covington. Although you could argue, and probably should argue, that was as much Colby's doing, if not more. Edwards seems to fight without too much urgency for the most part, which is kind of funny considering how he won the belt. But I think technically he's right up there with the best of the sport. And I look forward to seeing him take on a new contender, a fresh contender, hopefully the likes of Shavkat Rakhmonov. Number 4. Jon Jones. Jon Jones gets the number 4 spot, based on how easily he ran through Cyril Gane in his last fight. It was a performance so simple, so straightforward, that it kind of washed over a lot of people and actively worked against Jones. But despite his inactivity, that was a huge win in his second division for him to earn the coveted heavyweight belt. And based on his talent levels, the talent of Cyril Gane, which everyone seemed to bury as soon as the fight happened, yeah, I'm not putting Jones any lower than this, despite his inactivity. Number 3. Alex Pereira. I have Alex Pereira right up there in the 3 spot. He has had 7 fights in the UFC, 5 of which came against former, present or future champions, and he's 4-1 in those fights with 2 championship belts in different divisions to show for it. So yeah, I'm quite comfortable putting Poatan this high. Number 2. Alexander Volkanovski. Number 2 gives us the longest reigning champion in the sport, Alexander Volkanovski, a man who could have managed his risk better after putting on such a great performance against Islam Makhachev the first time around, by maybe not jumping into a short notice rematch, but hey, who knows, maybe he wouldn't have won regardless. What I do know is that this is one of the greatest fighters of all time, and I look forward to seeing what he can do against the lethal rising talent that is Ilia Topuria. Number 1. Islam Makhachev. Finally, as if there was any doubt, Islam Makhachev is the greatest fighter in the sport today. A man who we're slowly realizing is way more well-rounded than his billing might have suggested. He can strike with the best of them, his submissions are clinical, and his wrestling is just about as good as you would expect from someone of his background. It's going to take something truly huge to get him off the top of the 155-pound pile, and honestly I don't know where that's going to come from. Anyway, that'll just about do it for this video. But how do you think we did with our list? And if you had to make a new top 5, top 10, top 15 or even 20, how would you lay it out? Do let us know in the comment section below. And if you want to like the video and subscribe to the channel, that would be great. Thank you for watching.